What keeps a man from breaking when everything around him is designed to destroy not just his body, but his soul? When you're covered in mud and blood, when you haven't slept in 3 days, when the screaming of wounded men never stops and the rain falls like God himself is weeping over what we've become, what stops you from just giving up? Is it duty? Is it fear of letting your brothers down? Or is it something simpler, something more human? Can words on paper, written by someone thousands of miles away who has no concept of the hell you're living through, actually save your life? I'm 91 years old now, and I'm here to tell you that they can, that they did. Because without the letters from home, without those fragile pieces of paper that arrived irregularly and always too late, I wouldn't have survived Okinawa. I wouldn't have survived April 1945, when the world seemed to be ending and taking my sanity with it. My name is Robert Chen, and I was a sergeant in the United States Marine Corps 1st Marine Division, fighting in what would become the bloodiest battle of the Pacific War. But this isn't a story about tactics or heroism or military glory. This is a story about survival, about holding on to your humanity when everything around you is inhuman, about the thin thread of connection that kept me tethered to the world I'd left behind. This is a story about letters and how they kept me alive. I'd been in the Pacific for nearly 2 years by the time we hit Okinawa. I'd fought at Peleliu, a nightmare of coral and caves and heat that killed men just as surely as Japanese bullets did. I'd seen friends die in ways that still wake me up at night. I'd killed enemy soldiers at distances so close I could see their eyes. I'd been wounded twice, nothing serious enough to send me home, just serious enough to earn me some purple cloth and metal that I kept in my pack and never looked at. By April 1945, I was 21 years old, but I felt ancient. My hands shook when I tried to light cigarettes. I couldn't remember what my mother's face looked like without pulling out her photograph. Food tasted like ash. I was hollowed out, scraped clean of everything except the basic animal instinct to survive another day. We landed on Okinawa on April 1st, Easter Sunday, 1945. The initial landing was eerily quiet. Nothing like the hell of Peleliu or the stories we'd heard about Iwo Jima. We came ashore expecting a slaughter, but the beaches were empty. No artillery, no machine gun fire, no bonsai charges. Just empty beaches and abandoned villages. For a few hours we allowed ourselves to hope that maybe this one would be easy. We should have known better. The Japanese weren't stupid. They'd learned from their previous defeats. They weren't going to waste men defending beaches where American naval guns and air power could massacre them. They'd withdrawn inland, into the ridges and hills and caves of southern Okinawa, and they were waiting for us there. By April 10th, we'd hit the Kakazu Ridge, and that's when the real war began. The Japanese had turned the entire southern portion of the island into a fortress. Every cave, every tomb, every stone wall had been fortified. They had interlocking fields of fire, hidden artillery positions, and enough determination to hold that ground until every last one of them was dead. And they very nearly achieved that goal. The fighting was worse than anything I'd experienced. We'd take a position during the day, losing men to get it, and the Japanese would infiltrate at night, and we'd have to take it again the next morning. The rain started, turning everything into thick, sucking mud that made movement almost impossible. We lived in that mud, ate in it, slept in it, died in it. I commanded a rifle squad of 12 men, though we were rarely at full strength. By mid-April, I'd lost 3 of my original squad members. Corporal Martinez took shrapnel from a mortar round and bled out before the corpsman could reach him. Private Johnson was shot by a sniper while trying to retrieve water for the squad. Private First Class Williams stepped on a mine. I wrote letters to their families trying to find something meaningful to say about their deaths, trying to make it sound like their sacrifice mattered, like it was part of some larger purpose. But sitting in a muddy foxhole listening to the rain and the distant sound of artillery, I couldn't convince myself that any of it mattered. We were just dying, one after another. And for what? To take another 100 yards of mud? To capture another ridge that looked exactly like the last one? The mail came irregularly. Sometimes we'd go 2 weeks without any letters, and then a whole batch would arrive at once, distributed by a company clerk who looked too young to shave and too scared to make eye contact with any of us. When the call went out that mail had arrived, Men would stop whatever they were doing, covered in mud and exhausted beyond measure, and rush to see if there was anything for them. Getting a letter was like receiving proof that the world we'd left behind still existed, that there was something beyond this island of death and rain. Not getting a letter was crushing. You'd see men walk away with slumped shoulders, trying to hide their disappointment, trying to act like it didn't matter. I usually got letters from 3 people. My mother, who lived in San Francisco and wrote to me every week without fail. My younger sister Grace, who was 16 and still in high school, and my girlfriend Sarah, who I'd been dating for 6 months before I enlisted and who'd promised to wait for me. My mother's letters were always the same, filled with news about the neighborhood, about who'd gotten married or had a baby or bought a new car. She told me about the victory garden she kept in the backyard, about the rationing, about going to church every Sunday to pray for my safe return. She never mentioned being scared or worried. She always ended her letters the same way. "Be safe, my son, come home to us." Her letters were predictable, comforting in their sameness, a reminder of the ordinary world that still existed somewhere beyond the horizon. Grace's letters were different. She wrote about school, about her friends, about the movies she'd seen and the music she liked. She complained about teachers and homework and how unfair Mom was about her curfew. Her letters were full of teenage drama that would have seemed ridiculous to me if I'd been home. But out there in the mud, they were precious. They reminded me that life was still happening, that people were still worrying about normal things, that somewhere in the world, a 16-year-old girl was more concerned about whether Tommy Henderson would ask her to the spring dance than about artillery barrages and casualty rates. Grace's letters reminded me what I was fighting for, what kind of world I wanted to get back to. Sarah's letters were the ones I treasured most. She worked as a secretary at a law firm in downtown San Francisco, and she wrote about her work, about the other girls in the office, about saving her money for after the war. She sent me photographs, always carefully posed, her dark hair perfectly styled, her smile bright and hopeful. She told me about the future she imagined for us, about the apartment we'd get, about the children we'd have, about growing old together. Her letters always smelled faintly of her perfume, and I'd hold them close and breathe deeply, trying to remember what it felt like to be near her, to hold her hand, to kiss her. She signed every letter the same way. "Yours forever, Sarah." Those 2 words got me through more dark nights than I can count. On April 19, 1945, I had what I call my breaking point. We'd been ordered to assault a Japanese position on a small hill that intelligence said was lightly defended. Intelligence was wrong. We walked into a killing zone, and within the first 5 minutes, half my squad was hit. I dragged Private Collins behind a rice paddy dike, but he died while I was trying to stop the bleeding from his stomach wound. He was 19 years old, from Iowa, and he kept calling for his mother as he died. I held his hand and lied to him, told him he was going to be fine, told him the corpsman was coming, told him anything to make those last moments less terrifying. When he finally stopped breathing, I just sat there in the mud, holding his hand, covered in his blood, and something inside me cracked. We eventually pulled back from that position, leaving our dead where they'd fallen to be recovered later if we were lucky. I made it back to our lines and collapsed in a shell crater that served as our temporary position. I was shaking uncontrollably, my teeth chattering despite the heat. One of my men, a kid named Reynolds, asked if I was okay, and I couldn't answer him. I couldn't form words. I just stared at my hands, at Colin's blood under my fingernails, and felt everything inside me shutting down. I'd reached my limit. I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't watch any more boys die. I couldn't write any more letters to mothers and wives and girlfriends. I couldn't pretend that any of this made sense or mattered or was worth the cost. I was done. That night, as I sat in that crater, unable to sleep, unable to think clearly, unable to do anything except shake and stare at nothing, the company clerk appeared. He was making his rounds, delivering mail by moonlight, risking Japanese snipers to bring us our letters. He handed me 3 envelopes and moved on without a word. I stared at those envelopes for a long time, not wanting to open them, not wanting to face the gap between the world they described and the world I was living in. But finally, because there was nothing else to do, I opened them. The first letter was from my mother. She wrote about spring coming to San Francisco, about the cherry blossoms blooming in Golden Gate Park, about taking Grace to see them. She described the colors, the smell, the way the petals drifted down like snow. She wrote about stopping at our favorite ice cream shop afterward, about how Grace had gotten chocolate and she'd gotten vanilla, and how they'd sat on a bench and talked about me, about how much they missed me, about how they couldn't wait for me to come home. It was such a simple story, so ordinary, but reading it, I could see it. I could smell the cherry blossoms. I could taste the vanilla ice cream. For just a moment, I wasn't in a crater on Okinawa. I was in Golden Gate Park with my mother and sister, and everything was peaceful and beautiful and safe. The second letter was from Grace. She wrote about a boy at school who'd asked her to the spring dance and how she'd said yes, but she was nervous because she didn't know how to dance very well. She asked me if I remembered teaching her to dance when she was little, standing on my feet in the living room while Mom played records on the phonograph. She said she wished I was there to teach her again, to tell her she'd do fine, to threaten to beat up the boy if he didn't treat her right. She ended the letter by saying she prayed for me every night before bed, that she knew I'd come home safe, because God wouldn't take her big brother away from her. Reading her words, I could hear her voice, could see her face. She was counting on me. She believed I'd survive this. How could I give up when she had that much faith in me? The third letter was from Sarah, and it saved my life. She'd written it 2 weeks earlier, but it arrived exactly when I needed it most. She started by telling me about a dream she'd had, where the war was over and I'd come home and we'd gotten married in a small ceremony at City Hall, with just our families there. She described what she'd worn, a simple blue dress because white seemed too extravagant during wartime. She described how I'd looked in my uniform, how handsome I was, how proud she felt to be marrying a Marine. Then she described our honeymoon, just 2 days at a little hotel in Monterey, walking on the beach, eating fish for dinner, talking about our future. She wrote about the apartment we'd rent, about the furniture we'd buy secondhand, about learning to cook together and burning things and laughing about it. She wrote about the children we'd have, at least 2, maybe 3. She wrote about growing old together, about sitting on a porch somewhere and watching our grandchildren play. She wrote, "I know you're going through things I can't imagine, Robert. I know you've seen terrible things, and that you carry burdens I can't help you with. But I want you to know that I'm here waiting for you, building a future in my mind that includes you. Every day I imagine you coming home. Every night I pray for your safety. You're not alone in this war, even though I'm thousands of miles away. I'm with you. I'll always be with you. And when this is over, when you finally come home, we'll build that life together. We'll make it real. All you have to do is survive. All you have to do is hold on. Can you do that for me? Can you hold on a little longer? I love you with everything I am, and I'm waiting for you. I'll wait forever if I have to. Yours forever, Sarah." I read that letter 3 times sitting in that crater, tears streaming down my face, my body still shaking, but for different reasons now. She'd given me something to hold on to, something beyond survival for survival's sake. She'd reminded me that there was a future worth fighting for, worth living for. She'd painted me a picture of what could be, what would be, if I just held on. And suddenly, impossibly, I could breathe again. The weight on my chest lifted slightly. The world came back into focus. I carefully folded her letter and put it in the waterproof pouch I kept inside my uniform, along with her photograph and her other letters. Then I checked my rifle, made sure my ammunition was dry, and forced myself to eat something from my rations. I had to survive. Sarah was waiting for me. Grace believed in me. Mom needed me to come home. I couldn't give up. Not yet. The next day, I was back on the line, leading my squad, doing my job. Was I fixed? No. Was I still scared and traumatized and pushed beyond what any human should have to endure? Absolutely. But I had something to hold on to now. I had those letters, those words from home, those promises of a future. And every time I felt myself slipping back into that dark place, I'd pull out Sarah's letter and read it again. Sometimes I'd read it 3 or 4 times a day. The paper got worn and soft from being folded and unfolded so many times. The ink smudged from my dirty fingers. But the words were still there, still powerful, still capable of pulling me back from the edge. Over the following weeks, more letters arrived. My mother wrote about the neighborhood victory garden producing its first vegetables and how she was canning everything to save for winter. Grace wrote about passing her mathematics exam, which she'd been worried about, and how she wished I could have helped her study like I used to. Sarah wrote about a promotion at work, about saving more money, about the apartment she'd found that would be perfect for us. Each letter was a lifeline, a reminder of why I had to keep going. I wasn't the only one who depended on letters. I watched the men in my squad treasure their mail like it was made of gold. Private Reynolds kept a letter from his wife in his helmet, reading it before every patrol. Corporal Gonzalez had a photograph of his baby daughter, born 3 months after he'd shipped out, and he'd talk to that photograph like she could hear him. Lance Corporal Patterson got a letter from his high school sweetheart breaking up with him, and he didn't speak to anyone for 2 days, but he still kept the letter, still carried it with him. The letters were proof that we existed as more than just Marines, more than just serial numbers and rifle bearers. We were sons and brothers and husbands and fathers. We were loved by people who had no idea what we were going through, but who loved us anyway. The battle for Okinawa dragged on through April and into May and June. The rain never stopped. The casualties mounted. We took ground foot by bloody foot, fighting for every ridge, every hill, every cave system. Men broke down mentally, their minds unable to handle the constant stress. Others were killed by Japanese soldiers, by artillery, by disease. The lucky ones were wounded badly enough to be evacuated. The unlucky ones stayed like me, fighting day after day with no end in sight. But through it all, the letters kept coming. Sometimes they were delayed by weeks. Sometimes they arrived water-damaged or torn. Sometimes the mail clerk got killed and it took days to sort out the backlog. But they came. And every time I received a letter, I felt like I could survive another day, another week, another battle. The letters reminded me that I was fighting for something real, for people who loved me, for a future that was worth the hell of the present. On June 21, 1945, Okinawa was declared secure. The battle was over. We'd won, though it didn't feel like victory. We'd lost over 12,000 American servicemen. The Japanese had lost over 100,000 soldiers, plus tens of thousands of Okinawan civilians caught in the crossfire. My division had taken horrific casualties. Of my original 12-man squad, only 4 of us survived unwounded. The island was a graveyard, covered in destroyed villages, wrecked equipment, and too many graves. We were pulled off the line and sent to a rear area to rest and refit. For the first time in months, we could sleep without fear of infiltrators. We could eat hot food. We could write letters home without worrying that we'd be dead before they arrived, and the mail caught up with us. Weeks of backlogged letters arriving all at once. I sat on my cot in a tent that still smelled of mildew and disinfectant, and I read through everything that had arrived. My mother wrote about hearing news reports about Okinawa, about her terror for my safety, about her relief when she hadn't received a telegram from the War Department. Grace wrote about graduating from high school, about getting accepted to college, about how proud she was to be my sister. Sarah wrote about planning our wedding, about the dress she'd found, about how she couldn't wait to see me again. I wrote back to all of them, and for the first time in months, I let myself hope. We'd survived Okinawa. The war couldn't last much longer. Surely I'd make it home now. Surely I'd kept my promises to them and to myself. I'd held on. The letters had kept me alive. In August, the atomic bombs were dropped, and Japan surrendered. The war was over. We'd won. I was going home. The celebrations among the Marines were muted. We were too tired, too traumatized, too aware of what we'd lost to celebrate properly. But underneath the exhaustion was an overwhelming sense of relief. It was over. We'd survived. We could go home. The trip back to the States took weeks. We sailed on a transport ship that was crowded and uncomfortable, but none of us cared. We were going home. I spent the voyage on deck when I could, watching the ocean, trying to process everything that had happened, trying to figure out how to transition from being a Marine in combat to being a regular person again. I wrote letters to Sarah, to my mother, to Grace, telling them I was coming home, giving them approximate dates, asking them to be patient with me because I knew I'd be different. We landed in San Diego in September 1945, and the dock was crowded with people waving flags and crying and cheering. I scanned the crowd, looking for familiar faces, but I didn't expect to see anyone. They'd be waiting in San Francisco, not San Diego. Then I saw her, Sarah. She'd somehow found out which ship I was on and had taken a train down from San Francisco. She was wearing a yellow dress and she was crying. And when she saw me, she started pushing through the crowd. I dropped my sea bag and ran to her, and when we collided, when I wrapped my arms around her and felt her solid and real and alive in my embrace, I started crying too. I couldn't stop. Months of held-back emotion came pouring out, and I just held her and cried while she whispered, "You're home, you're safe now." My mother and Grace met us at the train station in San Francisco. Mom hugged me so tight I could barely breathe, and she kept touching my face like she couldn't believe I was real. Grace had grown up in the time I'd been gone, looked more like a young woman than the girl I'd left behind, but when she hugged me, she felt like my little sister again. We went home to the house I'd grown up in, and for the first time in 3 years, I slept in my own bed. It felt strange, too soft, too quiet. I kept waking up, expecting incoming fire, but it never came. The transition home wasn't easy. I had nightmares. Loud noises made me jump. Crowds made me anxious. I couldn't talk about what I'd experienced, couldn't find the words to explain it to people who hadn't been there. Sarah was patient with me, more patient than I deserved. She held me when I woke up screaming. She sat with me in silence when I couldn't handle conversation. She reminded me, through her presence and her love, why I'd fought so hard to survive. We got married in October 1945, just like she'd dreamed. It wasn't City Hall, though. My mother insisted on a church wedding, and Sarah looked beautiful in a white dress that her mother had saved rations to buy fabric for. Grace was her maid of honor. My best man was Corporal Gonzalez, one of the 4 men from my squad who'd survived. We'd stayed in touch after our discharge, and we'd stay in touch for the rest of our lives, bound together by shared experience that no one else could understand. Sarah and I did rent that apartment in the city. We did buy secondhand furniture. We did burn dinners and laugh about it. We had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. We grew old together, just like she'd written about. It wasn't always easy. I carried scars from the war, visible and invisible, that never fully healed. But we built a life together, a good life, full of love and family and ordinary moments that I never took for granted, because I knew how easily it all could have been taken away. I kept Sarah's letters from the war. I kept all the letters, actually, from my mother and Grace and Sarah, stored in a box in our attic. Sometimes over the years, I'd take them out and read them, remembering what they'd meant to me, how they'd kept me going during the darkest period of my life. Sarah would find me sometimes, sitting in the attic with those old, yellowed letters spread around me, and she'd sit down next to me and take my hand, and we'd remember together. I'm 91 years old now. Sarah passed away 5 years ago, after 69 years of marriage. My mother and Grace are both gone too, though Grace lived to see her own grandchildren grown. I'm the last one left who remembers what those letters meant, who remembers how they saved my life. My children know the story and my grandchildren, but they can't really understand it. How could they? They've never been in a situation where words on paper were the only thing standing between them and complete breakdown. They've never needed a lifeline that desperately, but I want them to know. I want everyone to know. That's why I'm telling this story now while I still can, because the power of human connection, of love reaching across distance and danger, of simple words providing hope in hopeless circumstances, that's something worth remembering. That's something worth preserving. The men who fought in World War II were disappearing now, dying off year by year. Soon there won't be any of us left to tell these stories firsthand. But the lessons remain true. Love matters. Connection matters. Taking the time to write a letter, to reach out to someone who needs it, to maintain those human bonds even when it's difficult. That matters. It can save lives. It saved mine. So I keep those letters still, yellowed and fragile now. The ink faded but still readable. They're the most precious things I own, more valuable than any medal or decoration. They're proof that even in the darkest times, even when everything seems hopeless, love can survive. Hope can survive. Humanity can survive. All because someone took the time to write a letter, to send love across an ocean, to remind a scared young man that he had something to live for. Those letters kept me alive in 1945, and in a way, they still keep me alive today, reminding me why survival mattered, what I was fighting for, why every day since then has been a gift. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of the power of staying connected with the people you love, I'd be honored if you'd subscribe to hear more stories from our World War II veterans. Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you have elderly veterans in your family, maybe sit down with them and ask them to share their stories while they still can. These memories are precious, and they won't be here forever. Thank you for taking the time to listen to an old Marine's memories. Thank you for remembering.